Well, it's time to have a look at the UK chart once again. I know a lot of you are interested to see what's going to happen with Brexit. And there's actually so much happening in this chart of the UK. It's a little bit like a minestrone soup, and we have to dissect it all, break it down, see what it all could mean in terms of we're going to be looking at leadership, we're going to be looking at Brexit, will there be a new election, will there be a new party, what's going to happen with the NHS, the military, and also in royalty. So now, first of all, I hear so many times them talk about, in terms of the American election, saying Hillary won the popular vote. She got 3 million more votes than Donald Trump, supposedly. But when I look back to the election that we had last year in the May, where Theresa May apparently did so terribly badly. In fact, Theresa May increased her vote compared to David Cameron in 2015 by 2.3 million votes. So it wasn't that bad. In terms of the way they talk about Hillary, if they talked about Theresa in the same way, they'd be focusing on that. But Jeremy Corbyn also increased his vote dramatically over Ed Miliband. So the real story of that election, I think, was the breakdown of UKIP and the fact that the commentators didn't expect so much of that vote to drift over to Labour as it did. They assumed it would come back to the Tories, which it didn't in enough numbers for Theresa May to secure a whopping advantage in the Parliament. But she did secure her vote share. Now, if I was in the Tory Party, I would not dare call an election for the rest of this year. Not because I think that's going to happen at all, but because Jeremy Corbyn had Pluto active in his chart. It kicked in 2016, and that was when he cemented his leadership of the Labour Party, and he's been building his power ever since. So that's kind of beginning to wane now. But it's still powerful enough that you wouldn't want to risk having an election. But I do think that he's over-egged that power. You can see right now there's a bit of a power grab going on. Momentum, the union's getting stronger and stronger. And he's got Jerry Adams coming out and supporting him. He's getting more vocal. He's probably going more and more and more to the left, which is going to be his downfall. But that hasn't quite happened yet. So, what can we say? What is happening with Brexit? Is it going to be a sunny side up, soft Brexit, or is it going to be a hard-boiled Brexit? Well, when I look at things going on in the chart, there are still two significant passes of transiting Pluto, which is currently in Capricorn, which is down here, and it's been opposing the Moon, which is in the 10th house of leadership, in the chart of the UK. Now, there will be something significant happening in the summer months and also in November. So I think this is the time when we're looking at a possible leadership challenge to Theresa May. They may initiate it just before the August break or just afterwards. So I'm thinking there's about an 80% chance during that phase of Theresa May's leadership being challenged. I think one of the main challenges in terms of the Remainers is going to be Amber Rudd. She's really going to be putting in the running. Now at the moment, Amber Rudd has got some pretty powerful transits going on, and also in her solar chart. So in terms of the transits, she's got transiting Pluto near the South Node. Now that means she's having, she's really feeling her power, but the fact that it's on the South Node means she's not really hitting the right notes. I think given her speech at the conference last year, she is a little bit of an iceberg lettuce. She hasn't got a lot of charisma going on, but I think she fancies her chances. Plus the fact that her solar arc sun is conjunct Mars, meaning she's having a real surge in terms of aggressiveness, assertiveness. She is definitely going to be a contender. However, I think that the man is going to get the job. Maybe not initially, because Amber Rudd could get in there, but I don't think she'll lead for a very long time, because the leader of this country, the next significant leader of this country, is definitely going to be Boris Johnson. It's in his chart, and his chart is a little bit ambiguous in terms of timing, but between 1 year and before 3 years, I'd say Boris Johnson will definitely be having the Prime Minister's job. He might be an ideal person too to lead us out of Brexit. I mean, Theresa May's hung on, she's really clung on, and she's holding things together. Now, a lot of the commentators are always saying about Theresa, is she just plain incompetent? Is she weak? What's going on with her? Or is she Machiavellian? Is she a real class poker player? from looking at her chart, I'm inclined to believe that she's not really incompetent. She is quite a Machiavellian character, and she keeps everything under wraps. I don't think anyone can judge her. If they're just going on appearances and going on what she's doing, I don't think you'll ever get the measure of her. Everything with Theresa May is behind the scenes. It's kind of crafty, a little bit cunning, it's very calculated. So she's certainly not a person who can be written off or underestimated. She's got that role. She's going to cling on to it for a little bit more, and I don't think she's doing a job in the most incompetent way that's being portrayed. But still, she's not the leader going forward. That's definitely going to be Boris. Okay, in terms of Brexit now, they've talked a lot about this transitionary deal, and I think they know at this stage there's going to be no deal. What I see going on in the chart, and I'll talk about the actual placements just now, is a kind of messy, disorderly Brexit. There's lots of activity in the chart going on in November this year. Now, if there's going to be a deal, it kind of has to be finalised in the October or the November, so that the EU, you know how slow they are. I mean, when they do a trade deal with these other countries like Canada or whoever, it takes them 7 to 11 years. It goes on and on and on. Now, we've got complete harmony in terms of all our laws and that, so it doesn't need to take so long. But you can see when you look at those time frames that for them to negotiate it within 2 years, pretty much impossible. And they would need to have it finalised between October and November, so they've got time to put all these laws through the Parliament, put the cogs and wheels get going, and the whole machinery of the EU grind into action to push this through, so that it can be done by the time the end date, March the 29th, 2019 comes. And I don't think they're going to complete it in that time, which means that's why they're so keen to have this transition phase, so that when we do crash out without a so-called deal, everything doesn't go totally haywire. So that is what I think. So do I think it will be a soft or hard Brexit? Well, Pluto is still very active in terms of the UK chart, not only in transits, but in terms of us also having solar arc Pluto square the Sun. Now, Pluto is the most powerful planet when it comes to change. It was active squaring the ascendant during Brexit, and now it's squaring the Sun. Solar arc Pluto is also squaring the midheaven, and we have the solar arc Sun square Neptune. So are we going to have a soft Brexit or a hard Brexit? Now, Pluto is still very active in the UK chart. It's solar arc Pluto is square the Sun. It was square the ascendant during the referendum in 2016. Solar arc Pluto is also square the midheaven. Pluto is active in the transits, and Neptune is active. That makes me believe that this is going to be a substantial Brexit. It's not just going to be some wishy-washy thing where everything carries on the same. Plus, we have an important transit of Uranus to Jupiter in the 10th house. Jupiter is the planet of expansion, of trade. That seems to signify to me that there are going to be some new trade deals, new opportunities, new growth opportunities for the UK. That is quite an exciting transit, which says to me that we will be out of this whole controlling dictatorship in a significant way, that we can take control of our destiny. Jupiter is a positive planet, and when Uranus and Jupiter come together, it's always about a burst of freedom, initiative returning. That's a positive thing, and that's to be excited about. But because there's all this Neptune going along, I do see that there's going to be quite a phase of great uncertainty and of possible problems economically. So I'll come back to that. Now, the whole focus that we always get in the UK is how bad Brexit is going to be, what it might do to the UK. All the car firms are saying this, the economists are saying that, all the great experts, who can never predict a thing ahead of time, are having their say. But they don't often talk about what's going on in Europe, which is very significant now. The EU weren't very happy with Trump's tax cuts, because they saw that as a direct threat to the economy of the EU. They're highly protectionist, they do their thing. God forbid another country starts taking a role that's going to threaten them. So that has put them on edge. Another thing that I found quite interesting is Trump seems to be getting on rather well with Emmanuel Macron. Now, why should they? I mean, they've got nothing in common. Macron is an arch globalist. He's into all the things like the Paris Accord and the whole globalization thing. So why is Trump getting on with him? Well, I think there are two things going on there. Macron's got this idea in his head that Trump is kind of a narcissist, and if he says the right things to him and if he flatters him, he'll get on the right side of him and he'll manipulate him. But Macron, he's kind of young, but wet behind the ears. I think Trump has seen quite a few Macrons in his time, and I think Trump is playing another game. He's allowing himself to get on the right side of Macron in order to drive a wedge between Macron and Merkel, because it's pretty clear that Trump hasn't got any time for Merkel. And really the cohesion between Merkel and Macron is central to holding this whole European thing together, especially as things get far more uncertain in Italy, the other big player within the euro. So I think Trump is trying to drive a wedge between those two, because I think he is looking to not so much destroy the EU, but certainly to weaken the EU, and that's something that might be happening. Now, Berlusconi is riding high once again in Italy. He's been emboldened by the whole Trump phenomenon. He is very close to Putin. So here you have these big players. You've got Trump influencing Macron, Putin influencing Berlusconi, and Merkel's position in Germany has been so weakened because she was struggling. She's only just this past week managing to bring together a whole coalition. So her position is a lot less strong because of the rise of the AfD and the problems in Germany now, that it's harder for her to hold this all together. And look what Martin Schulz was saying. I think it was just the end of last year or the beginning of this year. He was saying we have to step up this whole European project. He's talking about the army, he's talking about the harmonization of tax law. He's talking by 2025 of having what would really in effect be a full political and military union. Now, let me come back to Brexit. I think that in the year going forward, there's going to be quite a lot of economic uncertainty, not only in this country stemming from America, also going on in Italy, which may kind of set a domino effect going. The Remainers and all the people who are putting a lot of money behind keeping the Britain in are going to try and capitalize on any bad news, including any car firms like Nissan, the Japanese car companies who might want to leave. They'll make a big deal of this, maybe to push us towards a second referendum. But that won't happen, and the reason why a second referendum is now off the cards from the Remainers' point of view is many things have come to pass. They can no longer tell us the lie that there's going to be no EU army, can they? They can no longer tell us other lies. They're going to have to tell us a lot of truths which will cement in people's minds that it's a great thing to be getting out of this union. And then we haven't even looked at the fact of the dissension with Poland and Czechoslovakia, Romania, all those former Eastern Bloc countries now not wanting to play ball in terms of the immigration policies. So the fault lines are driving through. Now in the EU's chart, which I haven't actually put here, Pluto, again that planet of disruption, change, has moved in the solar arc to be on the IC, on the getting a bit confused there, opposite the midheaven, and that means an earthquake going through. It's shaking the foundations of this, and they are pretty scared. They're hanging on by a thread. So while all our focus is on what's going on in the UK, in the EU, they are struggling to keep this thing together. And the only thing they know to do when they are struggling is to double down on what they were doing. They're not interested in changing or giving people a few concessions and trying making it more democratic. They're just going to double down on control, control, control. And that's why they're going to have more and more of a problem going forward. Even Switzerland now has decided to hold a referendum where they're going to have people voting on whether they want this migration, because Switzerland have got kind of a deal with the EU where they're in the single market, but they have to accept freedom of movement, and now Switzerland are going to hold a referendum. So you can see just from Brexit and Trump, they've knocked a whole lot of bricks up this globalist wall, and are empowering other countries to go to the electorate and say, do you want this? And that's a really good thing. So let's talk about a few other things that are going on. We've talked about Amber Rudd, Boris the Mogster. I don't see Jacob Rees-Mogg rising up. I know the bookies have him as favourite for next leader, but that would be quite a big thing, bearing in mind he's not even in the cabinet at the moment. They've never had that situation where someone goes straight from being a backbencher to leader, so less likely. Plus the fact that Boris is tried and tested, even in a Labour city like London. He won 2 terms as mayor. That says a lot. It says that even Labour voters quite like Boris, and he's a strong Brexiteer, so therefore, so it's going to be Boris. So what about the other transits that are happening? So the solar arc sun is square Neptune. Now I'm always a little bit worried with Neptune that there's going to be some kind of deception, and I feel at the heart of this whole Brexit thing we may get the trade deals, and we may get a certain amount of freedom and greater control over borders and other economic policies, and we may stay out of some of the trouble that's going to be coming down the line with the euro now, with Italy, and Germany have now decided that they're going to turn the European bailout fund into a whole European IMF, which is also causing a lot of problems because France aren't very keen on that at all. So lots of financial problems coming to Europe, to the Eurozone, which we will of course be out of. But where I do see a problem is with the European army, because I feel we are already in that. And why I say that is the transits Neptune rules the 6th house in the UK's chart, the house of the army. That's activated because Neptune is activated. Neptune is also squaring Mercury in the 3rd house. The 3rd house is the house of communication, kind of propaganda, information. When Neptune's squaring that, it says that there is going to be a deception here. So what is the deception? I think it's going to be to do with this European army. Now, you may have heard of something called PESCO. It's like Tesco, but with a P, and very different to the shop. It's the whole coordinated effort for the European defence project, the European army. So why should we be concerned about this? Well, I'm sure you've seen in the news over the years, defence cuts, we don't have any aircraft carriers, there's been less and less investment in the military, and I think that was in preparation for going into this EU army. They're making out it's kind of a new thing, and they're saying it's because Trump isn't committed to NATO, blah blah blah, but it's been on the cards for a long time, and I think that is why our military has been run down to the extent, because they were anticipating this. Apparently there was a major meeting between some of our military in France, and for some reason this is kind of, I wouldn't say it's conspiratorial, but these chiefs, military chiefs, arrived in lounge suits rather than their proper army regalia, because if they were in their army regalia, this could have been deemed as treason. So there is a move afoot. Now, why does that matter? So, for example, if the EU is in charge of an EU army, they're in charge of all the procurement, all the budgeting for it, and they'd have to be in charge of your foreign policy. So if everything's spread out across the EU, so one country's maybe making sort of the wings, other countries making the electrics for the aircraft, the other country's making the wheels, split it out however you want. It becomes impossible for any country to act unilaterally. So if the UK wanted to defend the Falkland Islands, if Argentina are attacked, you now can't do that without the EU's consent, because if you send out some planes, your aircraft carrier, if you've got one, you can't get any replacement parts, replacement aircraft or anything, because they're made in the rest of the EU. So they just have to say, no, can't have anything replaced because we don't agree with what you're doing. So you have driven yourself into that. Now, one of the things I also saw happening in the chart was Venus was on the progressed Venus being on the midheaven. Now you think Venus, it's always a great thing in personal charts. Venus is always good, love, diplomacy, relationships, fun. But in a country's chart, it sometimes, well, very often means warfare. So I'm wondering if UK is going to be dragged into some sort of international effort, possibly around the area of Turkey. And I think that will remain the main hotspot, not North Korea and not towards the Far East. I think the main hotspot is going to remain in that kind of zone. Now, there was a guy called Lord Halford, and he was called like the father of geopolitics. I assume he was British. And he said many years ago that the key to controlling the world is if you control that area around Azerbaijan, that general area, so northern Iraq, around the Caspian Sea. That's why we continually see problems in that area. That's why troops never get withdrawn from Iraq. And now they're in Syria, and lots of bases in Turkey. So they all focused on that area. So if there's any conflicts, definitely I think it's going to be in that kind of area. So let's look at some synergies between what's going on now and past events. So for example, right now we've got Pluto, which is acting on the moon in terms of the transits. We've also got this midheaven conjunction to Venus. That's a solar arc. That's the one I just talked about in terms of the warfare. Now that was in common to 1936. What happened in 1936? That was the abdication. So here I begin to talk about some royal events. Now if you watched my predictions, the world predictions for 2018, 2019 and 2020, I talked about the Saturn-Pluto conjunction in Capricorn. I went on about that quite a lot. And I said how the Saturn-Pluto conjunction had been quite active in Prince Charles's life. He was born at the time of one, his marriage to Diana was at the time of one, and now I think that possibly the end of this year, could be the time when Prince Charles becomes King Charles. And that is echoed in these charts. Again, there's echoes to 1952. It was the last time Uranus and Jupiter had a significant contact in the UK chart. And in 1952, there was a significant contact between the Sun and Neptune. And right now, we have the solar arc Sun square Neptune. In 1952 was the year Queen Elizabeth came to the throne. So there we see a synergy with that. So again, major royal events. Now, I don't see any of these major royal events having any particular relevance to Harry's wedding because he's sixth in line to the throne. His wedding is more a society event than a royal event. It's got no stately or constitutional significance. There was also another synergy to 1977 and 1923. 1923 was the marriage of King George VI. 1977, the Silver Jubilee, a significant event in the reign of Queen Elizabeth. And also a synergy to 2012, which was of course the Diamond Jubilee of Queen Elizabeth. So all these kind of important royal events echoed in Platinum transits and solar arcs that we're having now lead me to believe that end of this year, going into next year, there will be a very important royal event, most probably Charles coming to the throne. There was another thing that I was quite interested in is the synergy to 1952, the Korean War, and I talked about possible involvement in some sort of conflict. And there was also a synergy to 1991, the first Gulf War. So when I looked at all those, I thought, it's kind of indicating to me, and with the influence on the army, that there might be something going on with us getting involved to a greater or lesser extent with some conflict. Now I did hear that with this whole European army, Angela Merkel's quite keen to go up against Russia, and Macron's quite keen to go tinkering in the Middle East. I mean, it beggars belief, doesn't it? They certainly just don't learn from mistakes, do they? I suppose it all goes back to what this Lord Halford said in trying to get control over that area, because the EU really is looking to be a global power, and I suppose to be a global power you must be involved in war. Charming. Okay, so let's see what else we've got. I think we've discussed a lot of the big... Oh yes, the other thing that was significant in terms of the Sun being contacted by Neptune is the NHS. When the NHS was formed, Neptune was on the ascendant right about here, and that of course was an extremely significant event in the UK history, and I think going forward in this year we could see a fundamental change in the way the NHS is run, possibly to do with more private contractors coming in to do roles, and people will begin to get the sense that there's been a shift in policy, that there's been a fundamental change to do with that. Right, I'm just checking to see if there's anything else going on there. I think we've covered most of the things. So yes, I do think there's definitely going to be some sort of financial, I wouldn't say it's total collapse, but there will be financial problems, which of course plays into the Remainers' hands, but they're going to have a problem explaining it away, as it will be affecting not only the UK, but many of the countries as well. So overall predictions for the UK, I think there's going to be a significant Brexit, that we will sever our ties with the EU and create a whole new relationship with them, that there will be lots of scope for good relations and for new trade deals, for new opportunities, and we'll enter a growth phase. There will be a lot of industries that will capitalize on this and do really, really well from it. That's something to be excited about. That's reflected in Jupiter being activated in the 10th house. Lots of activity from Pluto, which leads me to believe that it is going to be some significant changes, which is what a lot of us want, because we don't believe in that whole, corporofacet dictatorship that is the EU. I think in terms of the EU with Pluto on there, I see it's squeaky bum time for them, especially with Trump in power. Nothing is as it used to be, and all they're going to do in that is double down. And the more they double down on being hard on the UK because of Brexit, of being hard on countries like Italy with the austerity, and trying to push forward with more and more harmonisation, the more they're going to build up pressure like a pressure cooker, and I think it will play in the favour of Brexit and all the countries who want to loosen those shackles rather than get tied in further and further to this whole dead carcass that is the EU. Okay, I'm also going to be doing a little look into Italy's election, which is quite short really, because last year I did already have a look at Italy's chart. So exciting times ahead, and I hope you've enjoyed this.